So thank you so much for everyone for joining this workshop. In this workshop, it'll be an introduction to JavaScript through building a game. And for a quick introduction, my name is Simrit, and I'm currently the Director of Logistics for XAX Mini Vancouver. So firstly, the big question here is, what is JavaScript? So JavaScript is a text-based browser language that's used to make websites interactive. So the first version of it was created in 1995, and you'll often hear of it as JS, which is its short form. So within websites, to understand like JavaScript's relationship, we have the three main base website building browser languages. We've got HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. And if we're to take like the analogy of a human body, we can see the HTML as the bones, the JavaScript as the muscle, and the CSS as like the skin or the hair or like those cosmetics. So within JavaScript, there are quite a few libraries and frameworks that allow for you to complete common tasks a lot easier. And they're essentially just reusable code that's written by someone else to solve common problems. So you might have heard a couple of these like jQuery, React, Angular, or Vue.js. And they're essentially just used for different purposes that make it easier rather than just using vanilla JavaScript, which is like just the normal version of JavaScript. And within game development, there are a number of game engines that also make it easier. We won't be using these today, but we'll just be using vanilla JavaScript. But in the future, if you're interested in like learning more, I'll send this link in the chat for now. Okay, so moving on. Just a few key concepts before we get into actually programming that will be important to know for making the game. So first are variables, and variables are essentially just the name of a storage location or container for a specific type of data. Next, there's a class, and they're essentially just templates for creating objects. And in JavaScript, an object is a standalone entity with properties and types. So if we want to compare it with like a cup, for instance, a cup is an object with different properties. For example, it can have like a color, a design, weight, or material, or etc. The same way JavaScript has different properties which can define their characteristics. There's also functions. These are similar to a procedure, and they're just a set of statements that perform a task or calculate a value. And then lastly, this is a bit of a smaller topic, but it's an event listener that we'll be using, and it's just a procedure in JavaScript that waits for an event to occur to create like an action. All right, so getting into creating the actual game. So the game we'll be creating today is a browser, the almost most iconic browser-based game. So if you've ever lost like your connection on Google and you see that little dino game pop up, so we're going to be making a similar version to that. So we can see that our character can jump. It can also duck down. We've got a score as well as a high score that can also save locally to your computer. And the IDE that we'll be using for this workshop is Replit, and an IDE is essentially just a platform that you use to write your code on. And an IDE also stands for an integrated development environment. So if you're not familiar with Replit, I'll just send the link in the chat. So I already have an account, but I'll just show you what it looks like if you don't. So just loading. All right, so when you click on the link, you'll be brought to this page here. That's just their homepage. And you can choose to log in or sign up. Yeah, it's pretty easy to just continue with Google, but I already have an account, so I'm just gonna quickly log in. All right, so hopefully you've reached this page now. And on this page, you can see a bunch of things. For this, to create a new REPL or where you can create your code, you can see this create option here. You can click this add button, and over here you can choose any language you want to use. And in this case, we'll be using HTML, CSS, and JS. And then over here, you can name your REPL, and I'll just name it Java, or actually I'll name it Chrome Dino Game. And just make sure that your REPL owner is yourself or your account name. and click create REPL. All right, so it's just going to take a second to load. And if you see all these files and the HTML, JavaScript, CSS, then you're on the right track. I'll just wait a quick second. Oh, sorry. Oh yeah, thanks, Victor. But yeah, so I'll just wait a quick second to let everyone catch up. Okay, so hopefully you've made it over here, and I'll just give a quick overview of it. So over here, we've got the different files. So over here, when you open up, you'll be automatically brought to the HTML file. You've got an empty JavaScript file, and you've got an empty CSS file. These other options here, you won't need them for this workshop today, but here there's also the run button, so just running your code. And over here, we've got the console, and this is really important for JavaScript. So like if something in your code isn't working in JavaScript, it'll often show up here, the error. So that can be really helpful if you don't know what's going wrong. And for like here, this is where like your website can show up. I personally like just opening it in a new tab. So you can click this little icon here. And yeah, so if you attended like the workshop before this of the introduction to HTML and CSS, you're probably pretty familiar with this whole syntax. So for those that weren't able to, I can give a quick overview. So this is just an HTML file. This is what defines it as being HTML. This connects our CSS file to it, and this connects our JavaScript, and the rest is just like code you would need in HTML to start a web page. So yeah, we can get into like actually programming it now. So the first thing we're going to do is just change this title. It's not super important, but it's nice having something else. So I'll change this to Chrome Dino Game. And when I come over here, you can see that it would change this title to whatever you put in there. And yeah, so then over here, we're going to add some CSS. So in this case, we don't really have to use the CSS file. So if you want to put CSS code within an HTML file, you can use these style tags. So you can put a caret, a style, and then caret, and then to end off a tag, you put this / in before the tag. So within here, we're gonna just set up our canvas quickly. So we're gonna make the margin 0. And padding to be 0. And this basically just says that we'll be using like the whole screen for it, and it won't really change anything right now. And then within the body down here, we're going to add some HTML. So we're going to create our canvas. So we're going to create ID of game, create width of 640, and a height of 400. And then we're just going to close this canvas with that forward dash. Okay, so then we're going to go back to within these style tags, and then we're going to add some quick CSS for that canvas. And this is just me a quick display block. So this just creates our canvas over here. Right now, it doesn't really change anything. It's just a white screen. Okay, so with that, we're essentially done with our HTML file. So we can move over to this file over here, script.js. And this is where like most of our code is going to go for all of our JavaScript. So we can start off right away with creating a const and just setting up our canvas here. And we're going to do document.get element by ID and add game. And then we're going to do const ctx equals canvas dot get context. And then we're going to put 2D in here because we're creating a 2D game. All right, so the next thing we're going to be doing is creating some variables. And like in the slides, you did a quick overview, variables are essentially just the data that you're storing. So we've got a bunch of things that we're going to be using. So starting off with score. So we've got that little score thing at the top left-hand corner. We have the let score text, and that's like the text of in the both of the corners. We've got the let high score, and then we have the let high score text. And then we have the player, which is that red square that'll be actually jumping over the blue boxes. And then we've got gravity, and the gravity is the thing letting it like fall back down to the ground after you click jump. Then we've got obstacles, and these are the blue boxes, and actually we're gonna make it an array because we've got multiple of them. And then we've also got game speed because the game will speed up after like periods of time. And then lastly, we have keys, which is just controlling your player. And again, this is going to be an array. All right. So now we can move on to create our first class. So the first class we'll be making is our player class, and that's the red, square, I guess, that actually jumps over. So to create that player, we're going to create a constructor element, and with that, we're going to put a few letters in here. So there's X, Y, W is width, H would be height, and C is the color. So that just like creates the different properties of your character. So within that, we're going to do this dot X equals X. So we're just defining those letters. And we're going to do that for each of those letters. So then we're going to go on to width. And then we're going to go to height. And then lastly, we're going to go on to color. Okay. So then we're going to add a couple more that we'll be using later on. So we've got this dot dy, and dy is essentially the shift across the y-axis. So the y-axis is the vertical axis, so like going up and down. So that would be important for like when you're creating our jump variables. Then we've also got our jump force. And this is again when you're jumping, like the force you'll be using. So when we're jumping, like we've got that 15 there. And then we've got this dot grounded equals false. And this again is for the jump, which we'll be like referencing later on. And then we've got the jump timer, which is again for the jump. And it's all for the player. Okay, so now we're going to move on to like actually drawing this. So still within the player class, we're going to do draw and then 2 empty brackets. And then we're going to do ctx.begin path and ctx.fill style equals this dot c. So we're just defining the different variables that we have. And we're going to do this dot x, this dot y, this dot w, and this dot h. And then lastly, we're just going to close this. Okay, so now we've essentially gotten like the major parts of our player done. So right now we can't actually see anything on the screen because we haven't added any of the functions to like actually show it on there. So we'll be doing that at the end so that we can stay in order. guess. But a really good thing to do to make sure that you don't have any errors is to every once in a while hit run. And if your console doesn't have any red text in there, then you're on the right track. And if you do, then it'll probably tell you like which line your error is in. And then you might be able to figure it out. A lot of the times it's just like simple, like forgetting a period or a colon or a comma or something. Okay, so we're gonna move on to adding some event listeners. And these are essentially, like we mentioned in the slides, just they wait for an event to occur. So these event listeners are for your jumping and shrinking. So we're gonna quickly add a comment. And in JavaScript, to add a comment, you just put 2 forward dashes. And a comment doesn't affect your code at all. And it's usually just to help like another person or yourself when you're going back on your code understand what it means. So here we're going to do document.add event listener. And here we're going to do key down function ebt. So this will just be like when you press the down key, it's going to do something, and we have to define that later on. So we're going to do evd.code equals true. So that essentially means that when you click that button or that we define later on, then whatever we want to happen will happen. And then we're just going to add another event listener. And here we're going to do key up function ebt. And here we're going to do again keys evt.code. This time it's going to be false. Okay, so now we're actually going to go back into our player class. And then we're going to add an animate class. So animate here. So within this animate, we're going to be creating like our jump function. So we're going to add a quick comment for jump. Oh, okay. So within this, we're going to define our keys for it. So what we can do is if keys space. So this means like if we were to click space, so we're going to define that as space, or if we hit keys, key W, then the character would jump. But if we write else, and then we can do this dot jump timer equals 0. So that just means if you don't hit the key, then the character won't be jumping. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is, again, within this like animate function, we're going to do our shrink button. So we've got if keys. So here for shrink, we're going to make one of our keys to be shift left. And the second one, we'll probably do keys, key S. And then over here, we're going to add this dot h equals this dot original height divided by 2. So here, the reason why we're doing this is because with the shift left and the key S, we want our character to shrink. And to do that, we're going to be halving our original or dividing our original height by 2. And then if we do else, this dot h equals this dot original height. So this just means that like if we don't click shift left or key S, then your character is going to remain at its original height. Okay, and then we're just going to add this dot y equals this dot dy. And dy again is your shift across the y-axis. So again, that's just dealing with your jump and shrinking. Oh yeah, okay, so someone just joined late. Yeah, I can give a quick recap. So we're just creating a Chrome Dino game similar to this. So we just got like jump, shrink, and then like a score and high score. And then right now within the HTML file, we've added our canvas and then our style over here to just create our canvas. And then back in the JS file, we created the canvas again, and then just defined a few variables that we'll need. And then we created our class for the player. Oh yeah, I'll send the replit once it's done at the end of the workshop. Okay, so we can continue moving on. So the next thing we're gonna do is add gravity. So what gravity essentially does is it allows your character to fall back down to the ground. So this gets a bit complicated, but I'll try my best to explain it. So we're gonna start off with if, and then we're gonna add this dot y plus this dot h is less than canvas dot height. So here we're just going to write this dot dy plus equals gravity, and this dot grounded equals false. So this just means that like if you're like on the ground, then you're not gonna like this whole code that we're making, the simplified version of it is if you've jumped high in the air, you're gonna fall back down. But if you're on the ground, you're gonna stay on the ground because we don't want like our character floating around the screen. So if our character, then we're gonna, if the character is on the ground, so if our shift across the y-axis is equal to 0, then this dot grounded is equal to true, so it'll stay on the ground. And this dot y equals canvas dot height minus this dot h. And then we're just going to quickly add a this dot draw. All right, so I'll just wait a second. The code is just vanilla JavaScript, I believe. Yeah, I'll give a quick minute for if anyone needs some time to catch up. Okay, so we'll move on now then. So now we're just gonna create some more stuff for our jump itself. So we're gonna firstly create if this dot grounded and this dot jump timer is equal to 0. Then this dot jump timer is equal to 1. And this dot dy is equal to negative this dot jump force. So again, this is just working with our jump, so falling back down when you're going up and like going down. And then we're just going to do else if this dot jump timer is greater than 0. and this dot jump timer is less than 15. Then we're just gonna add this dot jump timer plus plus, and then just some more stuff just dealing with the jump. And this is just some JavaScript syntax. It's like pretty difficult to explain, I guess. And then we just do this dot jump timer divided by 50. Okay, so that pretty much finishes up our jump. And like I quickly press run and I have no errors in my console. So I'm good to move on then. So the next thing we'll be making is our obstacles. So these are like the blue things that you see coming along here, like that. So we're going to be creating a new class for these obstacles. So like we did for the player, we created that constructor. And again, we're just going to do our X, Y, width, height, and color. And then we're going to do this dot X equals X, just like we did for our player. This dot W equals W. This dot H equals H. And lastly, this dot C, which is the color, is equal to C. And then we're just going to add another variable. So this is dx, and this is the shift across the x-axis. And this is for like game speed. So just speeding it up after a while if like you continue to survive in the game. Okay, so we're going to create an update, and then we're going to quickly work on the game speed. So this just essentially would make your game go faster when you continue to survive. Okay, so then we're just going to draw this. So we're going to add a draw loop just like we did above for the player. And we're going to do ctx.begin path. And then ctx.fill style equals this dot C, which is the color. And then we're going to do ctx.fill rect. And then this dot X, this dot Y, this dot W, and this dot H. And then we're just going to close this. Okay, so now we've like created our obstacle, but we need it to spawn and actually like come at different timings and in different positions and different sizes. So we're going to create a comment and just do game functions. And then we're going to do function spawn obstacle. Here we're going to let size equal random int, which is integer in range 20 to 70. So what this does, it just randomizes the size. So here we see we've got a smaller one, but here we've got like a bigger one, like before I died, so we got like a smaller one and then another smaller one because it's randomized. And then we've got like a bigger one here. And then we're going to do let type equal random, again, int in range. But this time it's going to be 0 and 1. What this one does is it changes the height. So like here we've got one on the ground, but then here we've got one on the top where you have to duck. And we're just going to write let obstacle equal new. And then we're just going to write obstacle canvas.width, just defining the size of it, and then the height. And then size, and then we're going to add our color. So this is the blue that I've used like for that, but you could put any color you want. This is the hex code for that blue. Okay, so then we're going to write if type is equal to 1, so that's over here. Then obstacle.y player.original -10. And what this essentially just does is changes the height of it. So if it's 1, then it's just going to be larger or like higher than it. And we're just going to write obstacles.push obstacle. Okay, so then what we're going to do is work a bit with that random integer in range. So to define that, we're going to create a new function for that. We're going to do random int in range again. And we're just defining that it's minimum and maximum. And here we're just doing some playing with the library and just doing some, telling it to return a random value. So that would just let it return a random value for that. And then what we're going to do is set a spawn timer. So it just waits 200, I believe, milliseconds. Is it? And then we're going to let the spawn timer equals initial spawn timer. Okay, so now we're going to be creating another function. Yeah, so this one is going to be an update function because we made this class here, so we need to define that, and we're going to do update. I'm going to write if spawn timer is less than or equal to 0. Then we spawn the obstacle. And you're right. So this would just console log our obstacles. This isn't really that necessary, but it's pretty cool to see it afterwards. Then we got spawn timer equals initial spawn timer minus game speed times 8. So just including like the game speeding up. And then just if spawn timer is less than 60, then spawn timer equals 60. Again, just changing the time of the spawn. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is spawn our enemies and actually like get them to restart almost when you hit it. So we're gonna do for let I equal 0 then I is less than obstacles dot blank. So this also gets quite complicated, but again, I'll try my best to explain it. So here we're going to let O equal obstacles I, so when there's 0 obstacles. And then we're going to do if O dot X, so that's on the X axis, and O dot width is less than 0. And obstacles dot splice I and then 1. And then here we're just going to do a bunch of conditions. So if player dot X is less than O dot X plus O dot W, then we're going to do player dot X plus player dot W and O dot X. And then we're going to do player dot Y, then O dot Y plus O dot H. They're just going to do the and then lastly player dot Y plus player dot H is greater than O dot Y. Okay, and then just going to call on the obstacles array. We're going to make the score 0. Going to make the spawn timer reset. And then we're going to make the game speed back down to 0. So that's just a bunch of conditions if a player hits the object, and then if that happens, then we just reset it. Okay, so this thing is just for a bit after. So we're working on the score now. And what this does, it essentially like stores your high score locally. So like we see here, my high score over here is 11,000 from before. And then if I keep refresh it, it'll stay there. So you're going to do window.local storage. And then I'm going to do set item high score. I'm going to do high score. And then you're just going to write o.update. Oh, so I have an error here. I'm just going to go back and check. I probably just missed I probably just missed a bracket. So you just would check over that and make sure that your bracket is correct. So I just modified it and we see that it's back to normal. Okay, so now is a good time probably just to make sure that you don't have any errors like that. Okay, so now we're going to move on to creating the text itself that like shows up over here in the corners. So again, we're going to use our constructors. So this time we're going to add a tx. This one's going to be a little different because we're using text instead of just creating a box. So we're going to do this dot t equals t, this dot x equals x, and again, just going through and defining all of them. Then this dot c equals c, and this dot s equals s. Okay, so again, we're gonna go create that draw, and we're gonna do ctx dot begin path, and we're gonna do ctx dot fill style equals this dot c, which is the color. And then we're gonna do ctx dot font equals this dot s plus px sans serif. Then we're going to ctx dot text align equals this dot a. Then ctx dot fill text. That's this dot t, this dot x, and this dot y. And then we're going to close this path. Okay, so we're almost there. So we're going to create a new function. This one is start. So here we're just going to again define the canvas. It goes window dot inner width. We're going to do canvas dot height equals window dot inner height, and then we're just going to define our font. So we're going to do 20px and then sans. Oh, I forgot the quotations. I'm going to do 20px and then sans serif. And we're going to do game speed equals 3 when it starts, and gravity equals 1 when it starts. We're going to start off our score with 0. And we're going to start our high score at 0. But to make like our score, our high score actually stay, like let our computer remember it, then we're going to do if local storage dot get item. We're going to fetch our high score. And we're going to create curly brackets actually. Then we're going to do high score would actually equal local storage dot get item high score. Okay, so then we're going to be defining like our player. So this player is just like a red player, and we're just going to add our just define all like the x, y, h, and c we did, I believe. So it's going to be 25, 0, 50, 50. And then the color I used for that was a hex code of FF5858. So then to add our score in the corners, we're going to do score text equals new text. We're going to do score plus score, and then we're going to do 25, 25 to put that on the next corner. I'm going to do left. So that would like position it to the left-hand corner. And then we're going to add our color. So I'm using 212121. And then I'm going to add the 20. And then for the high score text that's in the right-hand corner, we're going to do new text score oh, sorry, wrong one. It's going to be high score plus high score, and then it's going to be canvas dot width minus 25. So it's be 25. We're going to align it to the right, and then we're going to make it the same color. And then the 20 to define the last one. And then we're going to create a request animation frame update. And this just essentially like clears our canvas so that like they actually move to the side and actually update it. And then we're just going to continue defining the score. So text.t equals score plus score. And then we're just going to draw it out. Okay, and now for like our computer to recognize that like our score is higher than our high score to actually update it, we're going to do if score higher than high score, then high score is equal to the score. And then we just redefine it as high score text dot t equals high score plus high score. And then we're going to draw this. So high score text dot draw. And then lastly, we're going to do game speed plus equals 0.003. Okay, so I'll just leave it here so you can catch up if you're a bit behind. So I'll just wait one more second. Okay, and then lastly, we're going to add our start. And now we're just going to quickly clean this all up. So just reorganize it a bit. So what I'm going to do is keep those consts up there. We're going to put our variables. And then I'm actually going to put my event listeners a bit above. So I'm just going to take these out and put them right below the variables. And then I'm going to leave the player class over here, the obstacles class. And I think I'm going to put the text function a bit higher so it's easier to see everything. Okay, so if everything worked perfectly, okay, so no, it didn't. So we're just gonna go down and check 222. We've got an extra, if we delete that. Okay, so we need to fix something up. So we've got everything there. I feel like above I must have missed. Okay, I think I missed this here. Yeah. Okay, if I add one here. Oh wait, okay, it works now. Okay, so when we open it in a new tab, we see that we can jump and we can shrink. And we've got our score and our high score. And then like if I don't, then our high score is saved. And it still saves even after you refresh it.